Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Kavanagh. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the article I just published called RFK Jr.'s Chances on my Substack, Jim Kavanagh's Substack, and on Counterpunch. And you can follow me on my Substack, and you can follow me on Twitter at @thepolemicist_. And please do. And subscribe to my Substack. You can read everything for free, or follow me on Twitter. So let's talk a little bit about RFK Jr.'s chances as a presidential candidate, as a person of political appeal across the board. And may presume that you've read a little bit of what I have said in my article. I won't go over everything I said there, obviously, but let's have a little bit of an outline of what I think. First of all, I make the point that RFK Jr. has an appeal across the political spectrum. He comes across as someone who will talk and listen respectfully to people on all sides of the political spectrum. He comes across as intelligent, reasonable, willing to have a discussion. And the attempts to isolate and ridicule him and cancel him and deplatform him backfire. When he talks to Tucker Carlson or personalities of the left or the right, what's considered the left and the right in the American political atmosphere, and then when YouTube takes down his interview with a reporter, or ABC edits and redacts his interview to protect you from what he's saying, he wins that. He demonstrates his open-mindedness, and they demonstrate their fear. And that open-mindedness is a real point of appeal for him. He demonstrates that he's not bound by the left-right polarization that we all are frustrated with in the United States. And people like seeing that. So, and even people who don't agree with his stance, which he's taken very strongly for many years about vaccine skepticism, even people who don't agree with that, see that he's taken that stance because he believes it's correct. He believes it's right. And he stood up for what he believes was right. And he stood up for that despite being ridiculed and ostracized by his own party, of which he is a royalty, and by his own family. And people admire, even if they don't agree with him, they admire that as courage. So he comes across as honest, intelligent, courageous. And you combine that with what he represents in his person and in his name, which is a powerful evocation of America lost, Camelot lost, indelible images of what the country and what a lot of people feel has been lost or stolen. And that makes him a very strong candidate, appealing across the board. As far as leftists are concerned, and by leftists here I mean people left of the Democratic Party, tired of the two-party system, people who have social democratic, socialist, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist views, not the American left, not concept of the left by which Joe Biden is a leftist. The segment of the left that I would identify with. RFK Jr. has had some appeal on basis of his resistance and his arguments against neocon policy and against U.S. arrogance and aggression and double standard idea that the United States can station its military all around the world, and anybody else who protects their national security is doing something harmful. And that has given him some appeal to the left. In that regard, we had he's been reaching out to left alternative media. He had that interview with Crystal Ball in which, he came across well, I think, because, especially when she demanded that he explain his vaccine position and then wouldn't let him do it. But with Glenn Greenwald, for example, that was the interview, I think, that undermined his appeal to the left a lot. First of all, because of his parroting of establishment line and really a horrible establishment narrative about Zionism in Israel, okay? Some people found that as a surprise. I saw tweets saying, I was surprised to see that RFK Jr. is a hardcore Zionist. Well, I don't see why anybody on the left would think that, or anybody would think that's a surprise. There's no surprise there. Zionism and support for Israel unconditionally is the default U.S. position for American politicians and for the American public. Zionism, even without the use of the term, which generally try to abjure or avoid, is the Zionist narrative is taken for granted for a long time in the United States. Is the idea that Israel is a good thing and you're a good person for supporting it. The kind of Exodus narrative, by which I mean the film Exodus in the book. So that has been out there for a long time. People have been bathed in it and soaked in it, and generally people have accepted it. It excludes and obfuscates thinking in terms of the intrinsically supremacist and apartheid producing notion of settler colonialism, the settler colonialist project that Israel and Zionism are. But that's the way people thought in the United States for 70 years, at least for 50 of the last 70 years. Now that's been changing. It's been changing because of what Israel has been doing and because people have seen and know too much now because of the information that's available on the internet. They see and know too much to buy that narrative anymore, more and more people. So as the intelligent candidate, RFK Jr. has no excuse for not recognizing that you can't just parrot these establishment narratives the way you used to 10 or 15 years ago. And the situation, the incident with Roger Waters and his flip-flop about endorsing him and then canceling that because of pressure from Zionists, well, it's kind of ironic of him not to recognize that the use that Zionists use the term anti-Semitism to cancel Roger Waters, just the way in which the establishment uses the term anti-vaxxer to cancel and ridicule and isolate RFK Jr. himself, to shut people up and to stop critical discussion of what's a taboo subject. So that attitude, that little game of canceling people on the basis of smearing them and shutting up the conversation using an epithet, anti-vaxxer or anti-Semitism, is the game that the Zionists played with Roger Waters. It's the same game that people play with RFK for vaccines, and that's what he caved into and joined in on. And he should recognize the falsity of that and the irony of that, essentially, for him. It's also the case that, the issue of Israel and Zionism is not just do you support Israel, do you support Zionism, but you coming across as the peace candidate. Well, you can't do that if you pledge war on Iran, which he essentially did with his rejection of the JCPOA. A Trump rejection that, he has no reason as a Democrat not to support the JCPOA. We should go back to the JCPOA. That's a great mechanism for preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. But when he tweets that, he's going to join Israel in resisting Iran, and Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, and we can't go back into the JCPOA, well, that's not a peace candidate. That's someone who's pledging to go to war with Israel on Iran, if Israel wants it, okay? It's also not a peace candidate. You can't come across as a peace candidate if you don't recognize how many wars have already been fought for Israel's interests. Everybody sits around and what were we doing in Iraq? What were we doing in Libya? What were we doing in Syria? Well, Israel had a reason for us to be in Syria and Iraq and Libya, and that was to destroy the coherent states that were the most resistant to Zionism and the most supportive of Palestinian resistance to Zionism. And it's no mistake, as a peace candidate, you have to recognize why are those the only Arab states that we attacked and invaded, the ones that were the most resistant to Zionism and the most supportive of Palestinian nationalism. So it's you want to be a peace candidate, you got to be willing to confront that issue and talk about it honestly. And you don't even have to demonstrate your honesty. For example, I would ask RFK Jr. one question to demonstrate if he's going to be the honest candidate. Answer one question honestly: does Israel have nuclear weapons? You can't answer that question honestly without disingenuous denial, diversion, claiming not to know, blah, blah, blah. Then you can't claim really to be the honest candidate. So that's one of the ways of looking at leftists saw this very clearly when he was parroting the establishment line with Glenn Greenwald, and it's certainly undermined his support on the left. Also, he's, from the point of view of the left, he's refused to kind of fight for single payer, and he's refused to fight for it because it's politically difficult. But, again, he's a guy who stands up for political difficulty when he wants something, when he thinks it's important. single-payer universal coverage healthcare is easier to persuade people about than vaccine skepticism. Most people, single-payer universal healthcare is already a popular policy, okay? And if he wanted to fight for it against the resistance of the establishment, the way he fights for rational critical skepticism about vaccine safety, and he could advance it, but it's not as important to him. It's not as important to him as the capture of pharma over the federal government in relation to vaccines is not as important. It is more important for him to fight than the capture of healthcare by the for-profit health insurance companies. So that's an issue that leftists see and say, well, you want to support, you got to do a little bit more about that. He tends to have an attitude favoring market solutions. The attitude that crony capitalism is the real problem, not capitalism itself. So that's something that undermines any support he's going to get from leftists. And the fact is, and nobody should be surprised about it, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not a leftist or an anti-imperialist. He is an intelligent, responsible advocate of more reasonable policies in opposition to neocon policy and American aggression. And he has demonstrated his willingness to take a hit for what he thinks is right, which is politically admirable. And those attitudes do make him dangerous for the Democratic Party elite and for the ruling class, etc. And they push them to try and isolate and ridicule him. But he is not a leftist or anti-imperialist. He is a Zionist and he is pro-capitalist. And that, on the other hand, makes him safe for the Democratic elite and the ruling segments of the ruling class that support it. He defines himself as restoring, not as an anti-imperialist or anti-capitalist, but as someone who wants to restore the kind of good old days of his father and uncle, as opposed to the bad new Democratic days of the neocons, which we'd call the bad new days of neocon Democrats, including people like Clinton's and the Bidens and Obama, although he might not say that. But he presents himself as a good old Democrat in the line of his father and uncle. So what are his chances with the Democratic Party? Well, they hate him, and they're trying to stop him, okay? But, they cannot control what's going on as much as they think they can, as much as they have. They can control a lot. But the first issue is whether Joe Biden is going to last until November 2024. And I think Bobby Kennedy Jr., and I agree with him, is betting that he won't, that Joe Biden is not going to be the Democratic nominee in November 2004. I think that's the case. And if that's the case, sometime between now and November 2024, Joe Biden drops out of the picture. Kennedy is in an entirely different position then, okay? He's got this enormous appeal across the board that has very powerful legs and stands on very powerful foundations. And the Democratic Party cannot stop him from talking on the internet. They can take down things from YouTube, but still, they can edit his interviews on ABC. But people still see his speeches and his talks on the internet. He gave a speech in New Hampshire last week. It was a very good speech on foreign policy that echoed, very strong echoes of the rhetoric of his father and uncle, and very appealing ways to the American public, so-called left and right. So the Democratic Party isn't going to be able to stop that from happening. They're not going to be able to stop primaries. They can tell them, we won't have any delegates. But New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, they're going to have primaries. The New England states are going to have primaries, and RFK Jr. is going to do very well. He may win. I think he very well may win some of those primaries. You can't just brush that under the rug at that point. When you see the favorability ratings, when you see the majority of Democrats don't want Joe Biden to run again, when you see that RFK Jr.'s favorability ratings are much better, net favorability, than Biden or Trump, okay? When you see that Biden already in the polls is losing to Trump, if they do a head-to-head poll where RFK Jr. beats Trump, then what's the Democratic Party excuse? If you want to get rid of Trump, you got to go with him. These are things things are going to happen that the Democratic Party elite can't control as much as they think. Okay, so that's going to be at some point, the leadership of the Democratic Party and the factions of the ruling class that it represents may come to see that RFK Jr. precisely is not a leftist, not an anti-imperialist, not a threat to him, not an anti-capitalist, not a threat to him on that level, but that he is, kind of like Obama, someone who can appeal to people across the political spectrum as a change agent and restore some semblance of credibility and appeal to the American project around the world. And really, there's nobody in the Democratic bullpen that could do that. Nobody. Klobuchar, Buttigieg, Marianne Williamson. I mean, the Democratic elite may come to see, well, we hate them, but we need them. And that's the bet that RFK Jr. is making, I think. And I think it's not a bad bet. He's got a chance. Even though it doesn't look like it now, he's got a chance, and a good chance. Because the reality of what's happening in the world and in the country is going to give him that chance. Now, it may be the case, of course, that lots of the Democratic Party elite and the establishment elite and the ruling class elite now are delusional in an extreme way, and they may not see that play. They may not see how it works, and that they're to their benefit in some way. Or even the Democrats may at this point want to lose because they see that the ship is sinking and they don't want to be the captain of it. So that's all possible too. But at the end of the day, I think Kennedy has this situation he's in now where they hate him, but they may need him. And that's the game he's playing, and it's a smart game, and he may very well succeed at it. Anyway, that's my talk about that. Please read the article, RFK Jr.'s Chances, on Substack or Counterpunch, and see the full argument. And subscribe to me on Substack. Follow me at @thepolemicist_ on Twitter, and we'll see you the next time.